It's August in the garden, and that means that I'm drowning in tomatoes. This is actually a very large bumper crop of tomatoes. I actually harvested all of these sauce tomatoes out of the patch right there just yesterday. And today we're gonna go over 3 of my favorite recipes for how to use tomatoes to make sauces. So I'm going to cover a basic tomato sauce that we personally love eating here in our household, and that's with sauce tomatoes. We'll be doing a cherry and corn tomato pasta. Very delicious, quick to put together, also using seasonal corn that's fresh out of your garden. And finally, we'll also be covering what to do with green tomatoes that you might have when you harvest out your determinate tomatoes. And there's just a bunch of green tomatoes left over you don't know what to do with. Today I'm gonna show you a delicious green tomato chutney. Before we get cooking, I need to wash off these tomatoes. Luckily, this harvest basket has a wire bottom. So what I like to do is just put all my produce in there and give it this initial rinse. So that's good right there. Now let's get prepping. Before we get into the sauce making process, I did have this tray out here. These are my heirloom slicing tomatoes. So I want to do a quick comparison to show you guys really kind of what the difference is between a slicing heirloom tomato versus a sauce tomato and why it kind of matters and kind of doesn't matter. So here's one of my Bulgarian slicer tomatoes. I'm going to just cut it straight down the middle. This is one of my sauce tomatoes that's a little bit more kind of watery, and then this one has these kind of walls to it where they kind of feel a little firmer and drier. So a sauce tomato like this that has almost no extra juice in the cavity here, and the meat of the tomato itself is a little bit drier, that's not going to need to cook for as long. Whereas something like this is another sauce tomato, it's a little bit juicier, has more water, it'll need to cook a little bit longer. And of course, a heirloom slicing tomato like this is going to be the juiciest, most kind of rich, watery tomato. All of these can be made into sauce, but the further you go down this line, the longer it's going to take to cook. That's totally fine. It's also kind of fun to just, if you have a bunch of heirloom tomatoes and you can't eat them all, don't feel afraid to just be able to turn them into sauce. Just expect to cook them a little bit longer to get that final result. So that's kind of the main breakdown of what a sauce tomato is compared to a slicer. And now let's get into processing all of these tomatoes for sauce. The first thing I'm going to do here in order to make the sauce is actually get a pot of boiling water here. And what we're going to do, this is optional. If you don't want to do this, you don't have to do this, but it does make for a better sauce in the end, and that is peeling the tomatoes. Now, peeling tomatoes sounds really painful if you just try to peel them by hand, but instead what we're going to actually be doing here is taking our tomatoes, grabbing a sharp knife. You want it to be sharp so that this doesn't actually take a lot of effort, and you just want to cut a basic X into the top of every tomato. All you're doing is lightly scoring the surface so that the tomato skin has been broken down into the flesh, and when you put it into boiling water, what it's going to do is basically make that skin just kind of flail right off. So I'm gonna just do that to all these tomatoes really quick. Once I cut all these X's in, we'll go ahead and throw them in the pot. What you'll notice is that I'm using a couple different levels of ripeness here. I don't really care if they're full ripe or not. There's gonna be plenty of tomato flavor throughout this. So I'm going to be putting in things that are a little bit more yellow, things that are a little bit more red, and everything in between. It's a sauce. In the end, it's all going to cook down really nicely together. And all of these were harvested yesterday. So the idea behind that is that all the nutrition should be really peak at this point. And now let's go ahead and pop these all in. And the idea behind this is that it's probably only going to take like a minute. Once the skin starts cracking fully and peeling back, it'll become very obvious that it's ready to peel. And then what I'm going to do once these are all in here is I'm gonna go grab a bowl of water, fill it with ice, and that's going to be our ice bath dunk. And that's going to help these skins just fly right off. So I'm gonna set these aside and maybe freeze them. I'm gonna go get a bowl of ice water and I'll be right back. It's been about a minute now and I think we are ready to go here. What I'm seeing is that, for example, let me pull out this one tomato using a knife, very sketch. See how that skin has cracked all the way down? If I go like this, the skin just comes right off. So that's exactly what we want. And we're gonna throw all these tomatoes in this bowl, which again, just has some ice water in there. So I'm gonna go dump this in the sink, drain this water out, and then we're gonna transfer the tomatoes in here. And so now what we're going to do is go ahead and peel these all. And I might actually set aside these skins. There's this recipe where when you peel your tomato skins, you actually save them, dehydrate them, and make a tomato skin powder, which apparently is quite flavorful. And I've always wanted to try it, so here's our opportunity. You might see that in a future video. But for now, what I'm going to do here is just take the skin right off like so. It just comes very easily off. Optional again, but definitely preferred, is to just use a little paring knife like this to cut out any of these cores because they just don't taste very good. And then I'm gonna transfer everything into the pot. So this is going to be a messy process, a little bit time consuming, but again, that homegrown tomato sauce is always worth it. So I'm gonna go ahead and start cranking through this. and I'll pick you back up when these are all peeled. All the tomatoes have been skinned, peeled, and the stems have been removed. So now what we're going to do is take this onion, and you can tell it's a homegrown onion because it has a flower stalk from where it bolted. So the middle of the onion is going to be hollow, just like that. But it's still totally usable. You just need to take that part out because it's not very pleasant to eat. So we're going to go ahead and chop this onion, throw it in first. I know a lot of you guys are worried about the way that I don't use the claw technique when I'm cutting stuff. And basically it's fine. I have never cut myself. I know I should be learning that claw technique. I've tried it many times. It just doesn't feel right. So what we're going to do instead is just cut an onion. So I'm going to start by taking this into thirds here. We don't want it to be too small. It doesn't have to be tiny. I got a little bit of skin left there. And then I'm just going to dice it. Nothing exact. This is very forgiving. It's kind of a rustic sauce. And again, you could do this however you want. You could grate the onion. You could leave it in bigger pieces. Oops, forgot to put a lot of olive oil. I like using a lot of olive oil because that is going to be the vehicle for all the flavor here. So I'm going to throw in this onion. And when that onion's in there, we're also going to go ahead and salt it. This is going to help sort of pull some of the water out of this onion faster, get this whole process going a little bit quicker. And we're going to season again later on after we've tried the sauce, but I always like to add a little bit of that initial salt at the beginning. While this is going, I'm gonna go ahead and get a garlic. One of the things I like doing when peeling garlic is first removing out all these skins, like so. And then what I'm going to do, since I'm using this whole head here, is I'm gonna just come at the base here, cut straight down. You do use a little bit of garlic, but it just makes the whole process a little bit faster. And before peeling it, I like to crush it. So if you take a look at these right here, I'm going to crush. And what happens when you do that, after you've already cut the bottom off, is that the peels just kind of pop right off like so. So there we go. We got a garlic head here. And again, since this is a sauce, I don't personally think it matters that much how you chop your stuff up. I'm just going to be very rough about it here and just basically annihilate it. When it comes to making the tomato sauce, I don't think you need to caramelize the onions that much. You just need a little bit of depth of flavor. So I'm gonna let them become fully translucent, but I'm not looking for them to be fully caramelized. The other thing we're going to be doing is, once that's translucent, I will be adding the garlic and some fennel seed. Fennel seed is a nice kind of like depth of flavor that adds to the tomato sauce. The other thing we're going to be doing is adding wine or vodka later on. Again, those things are all optional. That's the fun thing about making your own tomato sauce, is that there are a lot of different recipes out there. There might be your family recipe, but you can do whatever you want. And every single time you make it, it might be a little bit different, even depending on the tomatoes you use. And that's what makes it so fun and interesting to me, is that I can't really replicate it every time. I'm also going to be adding a little bit of hot chili powder. This is the Calabrian chili powders. Again, everything here is about adding depth of flavor. So then the final process will have a very rich sauce that's very unique. So while this is still kind of becoming translucent, I have my tomato skins here, which we separated earlier. I'm going to go ahead and pour some of this sauce back in. This has a lot of flavor from that direct contact with the skins. You could even sort of push it down a little bit, like so. Now we have the skins. I could separate these, dry them, make my own powder, but maybe that'll be an episode for another day. Right now, what I'm going to do is take this potato masher and just start breaking these tomatoes down. So that's what our onions look like right now. At this point, I think we're at fair game to add our fennel seed and garlic. So I'm gonna go ahead, pick up this garlic here, fennel seed. This is, again, optional. This is something we've really enjoyed doing in our sauces. And in terms of amounts, I'd say that maybe that's a little bit more than a teaspoon that I'm adding there. But again, personal preference, every fennel seed is going to taste different. Your flavor desire for fennel seed is going to be different. So just adjust it to your preference. Now I'm going to be adding a touch of this Calabrian chili powder. My hot chilies aren't quite ready yet. That's why I'm using this. But again, I don't want it to be very spicy. I just want to add a little bit of complexity in here. So a little touch of that pepper heat in the background of that sauce is going to make it really nice. Really interesting. So we want to make sure that the garlic is a little bit toasted through here, so it's not totally raw when we add the tomato sauce. So I'm going to let that just kind of cook through a little bit. I'm starting, it smells so good. I can smell the fennel, the garlic, the onions, the delicious olive oil. It's all mingling together now, coming together. This is going to be delicious. Ooh, that's good. So take a look at how delicious this looks right now. All that Calabrian pepper is turning it red. The fennel seeds are starting to brown very slightly, and the garlic to me looks like it's actually starting to cook through. So at this point, I'm going to be adding in this tomato. We did do that little bit of a pre-mash, so that's gonna help it a little bit, but we will probably mash it one more time. Again, this is all up to personal preference. You could leave it chunky, you could blend it at the end if you really want to, but I find that's best if you leave it a little bit of chunk in there. The thing that we'll pay attention to throughout this cooking process, because I'll probably cook this for at least 2 hours, is how the sauce starts to fall down deeper and deeper into the pot. So I'm gonna go ahead and scrape the sides really quick, just so we have a nice clear example. And then, let's see. So right there, I've hit the bottom of the sauce with the spoon, and the spoon is, I don't know, at most a little bit over 1/3 of the way up. So by the time it's done, it'll probably be around that depth. That's how much water we're reducing, even though we use sauce tomatoes. Again, personal preference, but the deeper you kind of reduce it, the more intense the flavor becomes, the more delicious, in my opinion, it becomes. If you leave a lot of this water, it's going to leave a very runny sauce when you put on your pasta. Now let's get this green chutney going. Again, I'm gonna use some slightly red ones. I don't see any problem to that. It's just going to add a slightly different flavor to the chutney. Chutneys are really interesting because you could use them as kind of like a barbecue sauce in the sense of what you would maybe put after something is cooked, not a cooking barbecue sauce. And it adds a really, really wonderful flavor to a lot of different things, especially things that are kind of fried, because this will have a sweet sort of acidity to it. It really helps balance those things out. Looks like I'm sitting at just under 3 pounds. It's about 2.5 pounds exactly here. So that's perfect. What I'm going to do now is core these tomatoes, cut them up a little bit, because we want to get that cooking process started a little bit faster here. I'm going to use a paring knife so I could get these cores really easily. Now what we're going to do is just chop these up into some sort of chunk level. Again, this is a chunky kind of chutney in the end. So you could do some smaller chunks, some bigger chunks, and you could mash it also to break it down a little further. But we don't want to just put the tomatoes in whole at this stage because they are green. They are a lot harder, so it's going to be much easier to cook if we help break them down even a little bit. Previously, I've mentioned that you could harvest tomatoes slightly early because they ripen from the inside out. If you take a look at this tomato, it is basically entirely green on the outside, but check this out. When I flip it over, boom, it's clearly ripening from the inside out. So when you see a tomato that's like 70% ripe on the outside, remember the inside is going to be much further along in ripeness. And that's why it's sometimes okay to harvest your tomatoes a little early. And I'm not saying to harvest at this stage. I would definitely prefer to harvest much later in the color development, but just a nice little perspective. You could see that it's clearly ripening from the inside out. Starting to bubble a little bit. Once this comes to a boil, I'm gonna move it inside and simmer it on the stove so that it doesn't take up this burner, but it smells really good. So for the chutney, we have all of our tomatoes diced. Go ahead and throw that back into the pot. So now we have the green tomatoes chopped up. We're gonna add some onion. So I'm gonna go ahead and use 2 onions since these are so tiny, but any normal sized white onion will be just right. Next, we're going to be adding some sugar. It's going to look a little bit scary, and actually I'm going to keep it on the lighter edge. The original recipe calls for 1 cup and 1 3/4 cup of brown sugar. I'm going to go ahead and just put 1 because in our household, we don't like things that sweet. But if it is a little bit not sweet enough, we'll add more later. Next, we're going to be adding some apple cider vinegar. That's going to give it a nice tartness and balance. And in this case, we're going to go in with 1 cup first. So 1.5 cups of apple cider vinegar. I put 1 in, like so. And we're going to be seasoning with a cinnamon stick and then also some nutmeg and some cardamom. These I'm going to be adding in stages just so I could gauge the flavor. But let's go ahead and start off with 1/2 teaspoon of each. Once the whole pot starts simmering, we'll have a better idea of where that sort of spice level is, and then we can adjust it a little bit. Now, over on the tomato sauce front, take a look here. It's starting to bubble. So now the entire pot has essentially come to a boiling point, which is fantastic. This is the level where it's going to start reducing. So now, in order to properly reduce this tomato sauce, what you want to do here is put it down to a lower sort of simmer. You don't want it to be fully boiling. Like let's say your stove goes from 1 to 10. You probably want to be at a 3 to 4, something where it's bubbling, but it's not fully boiling. And I'm also going to be putting on the lid like so, just so that it has a air escape. And this is going to keep it from splattering all over your kitchen and making a mess, but still allow some of that moisture to evaporate and get that sauce nice and thick and reduced. So what I'm going to do is move this to the inside stove where it could just simmer away, and we'll get working on this chutney. And then we have a delicious cherry tomato and corn pasta to make, which you guys are gonna absolutely love. The chutney has been fully spiced up, sugar has been added, we got the vinegar. We're gonna go ahead and throw it on here and get it simmering. One thing I actually forgot, which is probably one of the most important ingredients, is the ginger. So what I'm going to do is just peel it. What I like to do is just use a knife. You could also use the back of a spoon, I see that a lot. But a paring knife works really well as well. So what I'm going to do here, cut some rings, matchsticks, and then dice it. All we have to do now is wait for this to come to a boil, and then we're going to kind of simmer it at a higher temp than the tomato sauce for probably at least half an hour to an hour. That's gonna give it a nice thickness and a nice consistency. The goal is to give it a nice, rich, thick consistency in the end. So you don't want it to be too runny. You don't want it to be all kind of loose and spilling all over the place. But for now, of course, it's fully water because it hasn't started cooking. So now what we could do is get into the process of making that cherry and corn tomato pasta. So we already have some cherry tomatoes here, but I want to grab a couple more of these really ripe sun golds so that they don't go to waste. Also going to add some of these Austin's red pear. They're similar to the yellow pear, which has a really nice kind of rich creaminess to it, which lends itself to a really good cherry tomato pasta sauce. So I definitely want to make sure I have some of these guys in here. But at this point, it looks like we have enough, and all we need to do now is grab some corn. This is one of my favorite things to eat every single summer. I can't think of a better celebration of summer than a corn and cherry tomato pasta. Both things that you should have in abundance when they're ready. So this is a great way to use it, especially something like sweet corn, which of course is best on that first day. This helps you use more of it so that you can enjoy your harvest instead of waste it. So we're gonna start off here with an onion, and this is going to be a one pot meal. The idea behind this is that you don't have to clean very much. You don't have to use that many different things. The technique is very simple. It's all very casual. So we're gonna start off with an onion and some olive oil, and that's going to be the base of our flavor here. Onions in, some salt, then we're gonna get our garlic. Onion has a nice color going to it, so let's get this garlic in there and then just chop it up. Let's go ahead and get this in. Yeah, nice little stir. Now we're gonna process the corn. This is the Martian Jules corn that I've been growing this year. It's really, really wonderful because it has a more starchiness to it rather than just being entirely a sweet corn. And also, it's going to be dyeing my hands as I'm processing this because these husks actually have a lot of anthocyanin that can totally be used as a dye if that's something else you want to try doing in the garden. So let's go ahead and get some of these silks off. This cleaned up a little bit. And the nice thing about this kind of dish is that even if your sweet corn has started to sort of dry down and become a little bit dimpled, like as you can see here, there's a little bit of dimples in here, and that usually means that your sweet corn is going to be a bit starchy. In this case, totally fine, because the starch from this corn is going to help thicken up the sauce. It's gonna get really creamy. The sweetness of the cherry tomatoes will entirely balance it. So it's totally fine to even use your slightly overripe sweet corn in this case. What I'm gonna do is just come down with these kernels. What we're going to do now is add this corn. Since it is a little bit starchier rather than entirely a fresh sweet corn, we want to cook it a little bit before we get the tomatoes in there. So just enough time for us to cut up these cherry tomatoes. This is a very quick recipe to put together. Another squeeze of olive oil for good measure. Now for the cherry tomatoes, all we're going to do here is sort of cut them into either quarters or halves depending on the tomato. This is the Sakura cherry tomato, a very sweet cherry tomato. Austin red pear, like I mentioned. Let's see what it looks like inside. It has a very kind of meaty texture to it, which lends to a very creamy tomato. So this is one of my favorites for making these little sauces. It adds a unctuous sort of creaminess to the entire dish. They're gonna break down a little bit, but again, the skins will be in this dish. Sun Golds, very sweet, very delicious, complex flavor. I'm gonna just have these and that'll be just fine. As you can see, I haven't measured anything. I have no idea how many tomatoes I'm putting in here. I put 1 onion, maybe, I don't know, 6 cloves of garlic. And we're gonna just be putting in something like the equivalent of maybe 2 pints of cherry tomatoes. Again, personal preference, however much you want, however little you want. But we will measure one thing, and that's the ratio of water to pasta that we're cooking. If you look at the base of this dish right here, or at the base of the pan, the oil the corn and the tomato is already starting to emulsify. That's going to give it that rich, creamy, cling to the pasta texture that we're really looking for here. I'm just gonna throw a lid on this until the tomatoes have fully started to break down. And then we're going to add the pasta, the water, a little bit more salt to season this up. And we should be on our way to a very delicious meal here. So now let's go ahead and add the pasta directly to the pot. If you don't want to do it in a one pot because you're cooking a larger amount, you don't have to do it. Just make sure that when you drain the pasta, you reserve some of that pasta water to add back to the sauce to help thicken it up even more. And we're gonna just go ahead and add half of it in. I like using things like this that aren't long because it won't be as challenging to mix in a pot like this, but you can just use standard spaghetti noodles. Next, I'm gonna add 4 cups of water to this about 8 ounces of pasta. And actually, I'm probably gonna only add something like 2 at first, and then we're gonna just add more water as we need it. What we're going to do is bring this to a full boil, and we're going to have the lid on, but we're also going to be stirring occasionally, actually pretty frequently, just to make sure that the pasta doesn't stick to itself. So here's where we're at. It's been, I don't know, maybe 4 minutes now. The sauce has started to reduce. Again, right now we've only added about 2 cups of water. I'm just mixing it just about every minute to make sure that nothing's sticking. But it's looking really good right now. It smells absolutely incredible. So we'll check back in a couple more minutes. The water has reduced pretty substantially now. So what I'm going to do at this point is I just tried one of the pastas. It's not ready, but it definitely needs a little bit more salt. Because remember, we're not seasoning the pasta water. We're seasoning everything together. That's why I wanted to be a little bit careful at the start. But that should probably bring us pretty close. So at this point, the sauce is getting so thick that there's not that much water left. So it's actually starting to stick a little at the bottom here. So I'm gonna add a little bit more water. The pasta is really close to being ready, so I don't wanna drown it. But again, this is also turning into the sauce. So it's okay if it is liquidy, we don't want it totally dry, but we're getting very close to, oh man, just look at how creamy that is. It's just sticking together. The sauce is clinging really nicely. Very, very, ooh, it smells very good too. Let's go ahead and check this to see if it's ready. It's starting to feel ready based on just me moving the spoon around. I could feel the pasta is more flexible. And you could see here that the sauce, there's very little water left. But again, just look how rich and creamy that is. It's so amazing. And what we're going to do now is grab some basil. That's really going to help tie this entire dish together. Let's go ahead and grab that basil right over there next to this dish. All right, so now we're gonna just grab plenty of basil here. Gonna go ahead and cut all of these tops off to help promote that bushiness. Still early enough in the season that this basil has plenty of time to grow. And I want to get pretty heavy with the basil here because it's going to complement that corn and tomato so well. So something like that, probably not for this amount of pasta. So let's get all this basil. So the sort of technically correct way of getting your basil ready is that you should stack it into a little pile. And then what we're going to do is make a chiffonade, which is just a fancy way of saying instead of cutting up all your basil chaotically and randomly like it is for the garlic, you try to roll it into a single package like this. And that way, when you're cutting it, you're not losing any of those aromatics. They're all kind of getting into itself instead of into the cutting board. Just like so. Okay. Straight in. One last stir. Heat off. I'm gonna go grab a plate, a little sprinkle of Parmesan, and we have a wonderful meal from the garden. Take a look at that, guys. Straight from the garden, cooked in the garden. Let's go ahead and get a nice little scoop of this going. This is one pot. Nice little change of pace. I haven't really done a lot of one pot meals. I have to say, honestly, if you don't want to try the one pot, just cook the pasta separately, add some water in when the sauce is ready, and it'll be very creamy just as well. So there we go. I'm not a good plater, not my forte. So don't judge me too hard here. But I'm gonna go ahead, get some of this Parmesan just to kind of help finish it, tie it together with some umami flavor, some nice extra salt as well. And then just because I'm an oily kind of lover here, I'm gonna go ahead and sprinkle on a nice little last touch of olive oil, a drizzle of basil, like so. And right there, you've got yourself the perfect summer pasta dish using everything out of your garden. Let's see if I burn my mouth. It's so creamy. It feels like there's like heavy cream or like ricotta mixed into this. That starchy corn, the cherry tomato sweetness, the pasta, all those starches together have just made this unctuous, rich, delicious, summery, flavorful sauce. Definitely one of my favorite things to make every summer. Highly recommend everybody try this because something magical happens when you mix cherry tomatoes and corn. I don't know how to explain it except to show you how delicious it looks, how creamy it is, and you have to taste it to believe it. Pasta is ready, delicious. I'm gonna eat all that very soon, but take a look at the tomato sauce. I brought it back out here for you guys to see how much it's reduced. Let's see if I could recreate this spoon test. So there we are. I believe before we were at this level when I dipped the spoon. So definitely have reduced at least an inch of full water. Now that water, of course, is essentially tomato juice. So all that flavor is now concentrated. Just take a look, you can see the fennel seeds bobbing, the garlic floating around. It has a really nice color to it. And at this point, I'd say that this is ready to go. You could stop at this level here. You could mash it a little bit more if you want to reduce some of this chunkiness, which actually might opt to do. But I'm actually going to cook it a little bit longer because what I like to do at this stage is add some red wine or some vodka. That helps kind of bring the flavors together, sort of emulsifies it even more. So let me go grab a splash of red wine. And all I'm going to do here is add just about that. A little glug of red wine there. Again, vodka does a very similar thing. It helps kind of just bring the sauce together. The wine adds a little bit more flavor though. Totally optional. You don't have to do this if you don't want to use any alcohol or if you don't have any. I just like doing it because it adds another depth of flavor in here. So when you do add something like an alcohol though, you want to make sure that you keep simmering it for probably at least another hour to help evaporate all that alcohol away. So that's what I'm going to do here. But this is effectively ready. You could use it as is. Now let's move over to chutney. Here's what that looks like. It's clearly thickened up pretty substantially. What I'm going to do is just take my fork here and sort of mash this up a teeny bit more, just to get some more of that tomato incorporated directly into the liquid and give it a little bit thicker of a texture here. I don't want to mash it too heavy because you don't want it to be a runny sauce. This is a chutney, which tends to be a little bit chunkier. It smells really good. So I'm going to go ahead and try a little bit here, see if I can describe it for you guys at home. Wow, that's so interesting. Has that spice from the ginger, nice sweetness from the brown sugar. But again, since we used the green tomatoes, it has plenty of acid. And of course we used the apple cider vinegar, which gave it a lot of acid as well. Could definitely sense a little bit of that cinnamon in there. The nutmeg, the cardamom, I think it's totally good at a teaspoon level. That's at least my personal preference. If you do want it a little bit spicier, you can make it spicier. And again, at this point, I'd say that this is about the consistency you'd like it at. I'm probably going to mash it further. And if you wanted to, you could reduce it more. But right here, that's a totally acceptable level. It is thick enough that the sauce itself is hanging on the fork. So that's a good sign that this is ready to go. So here we are, I got the potato masher out again. I'm just going to break up these tomatoes that last little bit. I decided that it's a little bit too chunky as is. This will help thicken it. It will also make it easier to actually use as a sort of condiment. And let's see what this kind of comes together as. Oh yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Now we have a pretty thick texture here. The tomatoes are fully broken down and it smells absolutely incredible. Let's give that another fork test. So if I pick it up, look at that. The sauce is definitely much more clingy, thicker consistency. Again, this is something you could use kind of in place of anywhere you would use a barbecue sauce if you wanted to dip things into it. Cut a little bit of if you need a little bit of acidity and sweetness for something very heavy and fried, this is the perfect sauce for that. Now, in terms of the actual tomato sauce, we are going to let this simmer off for another hour. But again, this is ready. And this is one of my favorite ways to make tomato sauce. Add the chili pepper, the fennel, the wine, gives it a nice, complex, rich flavor. The chutney, incredible dipping condiment, serving sauce, wonderful for different savory and fried things. And my summer favorite, the fresh corn and cherry tomato pasta. Now, in terms of storage, I can't tell you actually how long this would last in the fridge, but I can tell you that you could freeze it in a quart bag. Same deal with the tomato sauce. What we like to do is tonight, I'll definitely be making probably some more pasta. I'll eat all this off camera, and then for dinner, I'll make some more pasta for this tomato sauce. Anything I don't use, I pour into a gallon bag, lay it flat, freeze it in the freezer, pull that out in the wintertime when I want some of my own delicious tomato sauce instead of the stuff out of the jar. So there you go. 3 different ways to prepare tomatoes, from sauce to cherry tomatoes, to even your green tomatoes that you might have laying around. All of these are guaranteed delicious. I'm sure you guys are gonna like it. So definitely give them a try. I'll be sure to include some basic recipes down in the description.